Okay, so the next lipid that we're going to discuss are the membrane lipids. So we have three membrane lipids, namely phospholipid, sphingoglycolipid, and cholesterol. Okay, we have to take note that the mass or 80% mass of the cell membrane are lipids. Okay, and the remaining are protein. So majority of the cell membrane are lipid membrane or lipid material rather. Okay, so the first membrane lipid that we're going to discuss is phospholipid. Phospholipids is the most abundant type of lipid, or sorry, most abundant type of membrane lipid. So the structure should contain two or more fatty acids, phosphate group, and a platform molecule to which the fatty acid phosphate group are attached. So meron daw tayong platform group. That platform could either be glycerol and sphingosine. With this two type of platform, meron tayong dalawang klase ng phospholipid. Okay, so another that could be found in phospholipid is an alcohol. Okay, so meron tayong fatty acid, phosphate group. A platform could either be glycerol sphingosine or sphingosine and an alcohol. Okay, so the difference between the two platform, glycerol has 3 carbon atoms with 3 hydroxyl group, while as for sphingosine, it has 18 carbon atoms with 2 hydroxyl group and an amino group. Okay, so this hydroxyl group and amino group in the sphingosine could act like the 3 hydroxyl group in the glycerol. Then maa-attach yung mga other groups such as fatty acids and phosphate group. Okay, so dahil meron tayong dalawang klase ng platform for phospholipid, okay, may dalawang klase rin tayo ng phospholipid. So we have glycerophospholipid for those with platform under glycerol. And the second type is sphingophospholipid, which uses the sphingosine as its platform. Okay, so let's differentiate one from the other. Glycerophospholipid contains two fatty acids, a phosphate group, and an alcohol, particularly amino alcohol, which is being attached to the phosphate group. Okay, so ito yung glycerol, yung dun sa site of attachment is the 3-hydroxyl group. Yung dalawang hydroxyl group, meron siyang fatty acid, and then the third hydroxyl group will contain the phosphate, and the phosphate will be attached to the alcohol. So all in all, glycerophospholipid will have 4 ester linkage because of this connection. Okay, so if you could still remember, the triacylglycerol, which is the first group that we had discussed under lipids, shared a similar structure with glycerophospholipid. Ang pagkakaiba lang nila ay itong part na to. Instead of fatty acid, which could be found in the triacylglycerol, okay, sa glycerophospholipid, we have phosphate group and alcohol group. Okay, now, we have 3 types of glycerophospholipid. We have phosphatidylcholine, phosphatidylethanolamine, and phosphatidylserine. Okay, so, pag sinabing phosphatidyl, okay, phosphatidyl is actually the collective term for the fatty acid glycerol and the phosphate portion. Okay, so ito yung phosphatidyl group. Okay, if the identity of the alcohol is choline, then therefore it is phosphatidylcholine. If that alcohol is ethanolamine, and then therefore it is phosphatidylethanolamine. If the alcohol is serine, then therefore that is phosphatidylserine. Okay, so these are the glycerophospholipids. Now, the second type of phospholipid is the sphingophospholipid. For this type, instead of glycerol, we have sphingosine. Okay, so instead of 2 fatty acids, just like in the glycerophospholipid, sphingophospholipid will only have 1 fatty acid. So that is connected in the amino group of the sphingosine, and that is why for sphingophospholipid, we have now an amide linkage. Okay, so amide linkage yan kasi ito yan. The amino group of the sphingosine and the carbonyl group coming from the fatty acid will be connected. That's why we have there the amide linkage. Okay, and then still we have the phosphate group which contains the alcohol will be attached to the hydroxyl group of the sphingosine. Okay, now, if the alcohol is a choline being attached to the phosphate group of the sphingophospholipid, then therefore that would be termed as sphingomyelins. The sphingomyelins are found in the cell membranes, and they are very important because they could be the structural component of the myelin sheath, which is the protective and insulating coating that surrounds our nerves. Okay, so if glycerol phospholipid a while ago has 4 ester linkages, for sphingophospholipid we have 2 ester linkages and 1 amide linkage. Okay, so those are the first group of membrane lipid under phospholipid. Now the second type of membrane lipid is sphingoglycolipid. So you have still sphingosine, which is the platform. This time we have glyco. When we say glyco, there is now the glycosidic linkage between the sphingosine and the monosaccharide or the disaccharide. So pag narinig kayong glyco, this term is specific for carbohydrate. Okay? So still we have there the fatty acid. Okay. So ang pinagkaiba ng sphingoglycolipid kay sphingophospholipid is this part. Instead of the phosphate group with an alcohol, we are going to have a monosaccharide or an oligosaccharide. Now, we have 2 types of sphingoglycolipids. We have cerebrosides and the gangliosides. If the monosaccharide or if this part is a monosaccharide, which is either glucose or galactose, it could be termed as the simplest sphingoglycolipids, which are known as the cerebrosides. Now, if you're going to have up to 7 monosaccharide residues here, so therefore they are going to be oligosaccharide, then therefore the sphingoglycolipid is known as the gangliosides. Okay, so there are 2 types of sphingoglycolipids. There are the cerebrosides and gangliosides, depending on the number of the monosaccharide units that would be attached on this part of the sphingosine. Okay, and the last type of phospholipid is the cholesterol. Okay, cholesterol is a steroid. When we say steroid, these are a fused ring system that involves 3 6-membered ring and a 1 5-membered ring. So we have 3 rings here with 6 carbon atoms or 6-membered rings. Ito 66 daw siya kaya may hexagon. Okay, so may 3 hexagon tayo dyan and 1 5-membered ring. So ito yung 5-member. Okay, this steroid fused ring is known as the steroid nucleus. So this is the structure of all steroid. Okay, so that's the steroid nucleus. We have 17 carbon atoms. We start here. This is carbon number 1, then rotating, that would be 5. And then here would be 6, and then that would be 10. Then start again here, 11. Then this one would be 14. And the last ring would have 15 to 17. So all in all, we have 4 rings in the steroid nucleus. Now, when we say cholesterol, the cholesterol is actually at 27. It contains 27 carbon atoms. So we have here, so we have here the steroid nucleus. Okay. So on the 3rd carbon atom, we have hydroxyl group. Between carbon atom 5 and 6, we have double bond. On carbon atom number 10, we have another methyl group. And then on the carbon 13, we have methyl group. And on the carbon 17, we have this long chain of carbon atom. All in all, we have 27 carbon atoms for the cholesterol. So this is the structure of the cholesterol. Now, we all know that cholesterol could be obtained from our dietary intake, but I want to point out that we could also within ourselves could synthesize cholesterol with the help of our liver and our intestine. So, meron tayong mga biosynthetic cholesterol. When we say biosynthetic within the body, we are producing our own cholesterol. And that's why if our dietary intake is very high, or the cholesterol obtained from our dietary intake are very high, our body has a mechanism to lower the production. The biosynthetic production would be reduced. However, hindi niya kayang i-reduce ng sobra-sobra para lang sana mabalance yung intake. Okay? So, usually, the total body cholesterol meaning that ito yun yung biosynthetic plus the dietary. Okay? Would increase because of the intake of cholesterol. Kasi nga, the mechanism of our body, the reducing mechanism of our body to produce the biosynthetic molecules is much less. Okay, so mas mababa yung hindi niya kayang tapatan yung dietary intake mo. Kaya habang tumatagal, okay, kahit na may kayang nating i-reduce yung biosynthetic, pero dahil sa sobrang daming kinakain ng cholesterol, okay, so kaya nag-i-increase pa rin yung cholesterol level ng isang tao. Okay, so we have here the list of foods that has its cholesterol content. So from egg, shrimp, fish fillet. So egg really has high cholesterol, while for fish, so mababa lang siya. Mababa lang ang cholesterol level niya. Now, cholesterol is distributed throughout the body via our bloodstream. But because cholesterol is sparingly soluble in water, which is actually component of the blood, a protein carrier system is used for its distribution. Okay? So, meron tayong tinatawag na lipoprotein. These are the cholesterol protein combination that are responsible in carrying this through our bloodstream. Okay, so we have two types of lipoprotein. We have the LDL, which is the low density lipoprotein. This lipoprotein carries cholesterol from our liver to various tissues within our body for their use. Okay, so we call this low density as the bad cholesterol. Okay, so they are being stored, okay, in our body. While as for high density lipoprotein, which is the HDL, these are the lipoprotein that carries the excess cholesterol from our tissue back to the liver, processing it and excrete it from our body. And we term this as good cholesterol. Okay, so we aim for a high value of dapat mataas yung high density lipoprotein natin at dapat mababa lang din yung low density lipoprotein natin. Okay? Kasi dapat konti lang dapat yung nai-store sa ating katawan at dapat madami ang nai-excrete. Okay? However, if there is an imbalance, okay, that could occur in our body wherein too much cholesterol is being transported by LDL. So, madami na siyang ini-store sa tissue. And then, too little by the HDL. Konti naman yung in-excrete niya. Then, this could result to increase in blood cholesterol level, which will contribute to atherosclerosis, which is the plaque buildup along the inner walls of our arteries. Okay, so study shows that women in general have higher HDL levels than men, and non-smokers usually have higher HDL than the smokers. And on regular basis, exercise could also tend to increase the HDL level. Okay, so we could compute for the cholesterol ratio by having the total cholesterol divided by the HDL. If the ratio is 6, therefore you are high risk for having a heart disease, while as for having a 3 cholesterol ratio, you're going to have a low risk for having a heart disease. Okay, so paano ba ito? If you're going to have, say for example, the total cholesterol is, so the total cholesterol, say for example, this is, total cholesterol is 180. So 180. And then the HDL is, say for example, um, let's have let's have 60 milligrams per deciliter. Okay. So the cholesterol ratio will be 3. 180 divided by 60 is 3. So you're going to have low risk of having a heart disease. However, if, say for example, the total cholesterol is 150, and then the HDL is very low, which is 30. Okay, so therefore the cholesterol ratio will be 5, and you are above average risk of having heart disease. So kailangan i-increase natin yung HDL natin so as to prevent of having a risk of this heart disease. Okay? Now, since we are talking about lipid membrane, okay, we have to discuss cell membrane. So cell membrane is also known as the plasma membrane, and this separates the cytoplasm of a cell from its surrounding and controls the movement of the substances in and out of the cell. Okay, so the structure of the cell membrane includes a lipid bilayer, which is a two-layer thick structure of phospholipid and glycolipid. Okay, we also have cholesterol, so na-discuss natin yan, and some proteins. Okay, so these proteins could either be integral membrane protein or peripheral membrane protein. This is responsible for moving the nutrients and electrolytes across the membrane. And of course, we have the fourth component of a cell membrane are the markers, usually carbohydrates in the form of oligosaccharides, which is actually a portion of the glycoprotein and the glycolipids that could be found in the outer membrane. So we have here the peripheral membrane lipid, and then we have here the integral membrane lipid. So we have here the cholesterol. Okay, naka-embed siya dun sa mga lipid bilayer. Ito yung lipid bilayer. This is the polar part, and this is the both polar part is outside. Tapos yung mga non-polar tails nila ay nandun sa loob, wherein the cholesterol has been embedded. Okay? So we have protein with carbohydrate markers. So ito yung mga carbohydrates natin. Okay? And then we also have integral. So this is the integral membrane. So always bear in mind, meron tayong 5 component ng membrane. We have the lipid bilayer, you have the cholesterol, you have the protein, and you have the markers, which are the carbohydrate part. Okay? Now, in terms of transport across this cell membrane, we have 3 types. We have passive transport, which requires no cellular expenditure. Rather, they just diffuse from high to low concentration. So the substances does not need any ATP or energy expenditure. Rather, they use their concentration to be moved across the cell membrane. And usually, um, the molecules that undergo passive transport are the oxygen, nitrogen, water, urea, and ethanol. Okay, so they could just diffuse from one place to another in the cell across the cell membrane. Now, for facilitated transport, this does not need an energy expenditure. However, what it's used are the membrane proteins which actually act as gate. So, kailangan niya yung aid ng membrane proteins. So, from here, glucose, chloride ions, and bicarbonate could cross the membrane, okay, because of these gates. Okay. And the last, the active transport. This transport still the membrane protein could act as pump, and for that pump to transport these substances, it needs an expenditure of energy in the form of ATP, and the molecules to be transported in this manner are sodium, potassium, hydronium ions. Okay, so we have three types of transport. Yung isa hindi nangangailangan ng ATP, rather it make use of its concentration to cross the membrane. While for facilitated transport, the membrane protein needs or act as a gate, but still no energy is required. So, move pa rin yung mga substances without ATP. And then the active transport needs energy so that the membrane protein could pump them and cross the membrane.